HR episode of our short series here at HR University. I am Anthony Otero, the community lead of HR University. And this week, Katia Olivera is joining us from Text Us, the name of the organization. And so, Katia, well, welcome and being a special guest this week.
Thanks so much, Anthony. I really appreciate it, and I'm really excited to be a guest.
Yeah, sure, sure. So, Katia, definitely was interested in your background, based on your digital footprint in the HR space. Just can you just talk a little bit about more about your career journey and kind of how did you step into HR? Just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. So what I will say is I don't think I necessarily knew exactly that I wanted to go into HR after school. I knew I wanted to work with people in some form or capacity, but to be honest, I didn't know much about HR. And I kind of tried to figure my way out right out of school. And I got lucky to start working in attracting talent, so talent acquisition, at a nonprofit university. Um, and that was my first real introduction into HR from a talent acquisition perspective, but not from an employer perspective. It was more from a university to student.
Nice.
Um, yeah. And then through that opportunity, I gained experience in understanding how to market to different demographics. And then through that, I went into Zayo, which was a telecom startup at the time in Boulder. And so that was where I truly got my first taste of what actual HR was within a larger organization, but then was also exposed to the startup world. Um, and that was a really great experience. One, because I got exposed to technology. And so I really love how fast paced technology is and things are constantly changing. Two, I also was able to work with executives. And so I understood I had to learn how to communicate with them and really understand what their vision was for the programs that I was building out. And three, I had a lot of ownership within my role, reporting directly into the C suite allowed for me to build out departments, programs from the ground up, and then see them flourish. And so Zayo was the first opportunity that I had to do that. There, I was primarily in university recruiting, and I built out their internship program in the Boulder, Denver, and Chicago area. That program was extremely successful. The mission of that program was to develop leaders into future leaders of Zayo. There's actually people that were in that program that are now at the C-suite at Zayo or at other telecom companies. So it was really successful. Um, and then from there, I did continue just in the startup world. And where I found my niche was coming into organizations when they were about 30 to 50 people and then helping them grow to 200 ish and then going through some sort of exit. So whether that was an IPO or an acquisition, that's been the trajectory. That's been what I've been focused on over the last 10-ish years.
And I noticed that with your with your digital footprint online, your HR career, and I'm fascinated by it. I'm sure a lot of folks in our community as well. Talk about working in a department of one, creating HR from the ground up. My personal experience has been working with very large organizations, smallest is 2,000.
Right.
But this is the other way, kind of for our audience, maybe more entrepreneurs, and kind of like, oh, do I do that or whatnot? Like, talk a little about that. Like, what resources did you use? I mean, that's so fascinated by that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I would say that after some time of working in larger HR teams, and I want to be fair, I've never worked for like a Google or an Amazon where there's tens of thousand employees, right? And the HR department is massive. My largest HR team was at Zayo and then actually at Uplight, where I think we had at most 7 to 10 HR people. And so I've always been part of smaller teams, but I think there came a point in my career where I was ready to break off from my manager or leadership and really be the one to set the precedence for how HR and the culture of the organization, and try to help shape the culture of the organization on my own.
Sure.
Versus having somebody like an HR director or a VP help collaborate with me on that. And so I think a couple of things that I would say. One, it's definitely not for the faint of heart. I'm not trying. It's a very intense task to do, but I think it's something that is really rewarding. And it is something that is really exciting, especially depending on how quickly the organization is growing and what the initiatives that leadership wants to accomplish. I would say throughout my career, especially as I was in the building out phase, this was before Chat GPT. So it was a lot of Googling. And it was a lot of Googling, but then also reading articles, honestly, whether it was on the internet or in magazines, and really just trying to figure out, would that work for this organization or not? It was a lot of trial and error. And I would say, because for most of my career, I was actually in person up until 2020.
Sure.
I actually was able to build a pretty substantial HR network in person. And so a lot of it was reaching out to my HR network and asking them for their perspectives, for asking them for help with any situations that could come up.
What did you find rewarding? Kind of working in that kind of startup and you getting your creative juices flowing. Like, so you did say it's not for the faint of heart, but it seems based on your career trajectory, you build definitely a niche for yourself, and that's kind of that organization size. Like, what do you find rewarding about that?
Yeah, I think it's about being able to accomplish what people may not have thought was possible. Honestly, that's like one thing,
Okay.
which sounds crazy, but I remember at one of my companies, Simple Energy, which was then acquired by Uplight, we had a goal of hiring 45 customer experience representatives within 6 weeks. And it was something that normally companies would actually outsource to third-party vendors or contractors to help them fill, or we would have to find third-party vendors to bring in part-time employees to help us accomplish that. And to be honest, because we were a startup, we were really scrappy. We didn't have the means to pay for any sort of recruiting vendors or hire part-time individuals. And so we had to hire them, and we had to hire them in quote unquote the cheapest way possible. And that was a time when we were all still in person. And so we started being really creative with how we were recruiting for these individuals, and we were able to accomplish hiring all 45, I think, within 5 weeks instead of 6 weeks. And so when I mean creative, I mean we went around and we were hanging not posters, but like little pamphlets that had like seasonal help,
Okay.
little
Okay.
tabs that people would pull
Yeah. Yeah.
around restaurants and like libraries in the Boulder community. We held various open houses throughout that time where people could just walk in, learn about the culture, interview on the spot, and then would be able to quickly turn around their offer letter. Obviously, there was a lot more back end work that needed to go into that before we
Right.
did it. But things like that, right? Things that I think other people may have tried to shy away from or would have thought was not possible, like we were able to accomplish. And that's something that I'm really proud of. I think the other piece that's more tangible is just being able to see the headcount grow, right? So when I started at Simple Energy, we were at 33, and then over a time span of 18 months, we grew to 125, I think, 122. And so it was just massive growth. And that was purely done from like an HR manager relationship.
Nice. Nice.
And so that I would say And then the intangibles are just around hearing people's feedback, around still being able to maintain the culture or even enhance the culture, even when the organization has gotten so big.
Right.
And so, yeah, I would say those things
Oh,
are by far the most rewarding. The other piece, just one last one.
yeah, sure,
The,
sure. Absolutely. We're
the,
all learning, and there's some questions in the chat already.
okay,
Go
yeah.
ahead, but no, continue, continue.
The other piece would be is just from a manager standpoint, being able to see managers learn and grow in terms of how to develop their employees is
Yeah.
also very rewarding. I really love that aspect. And I think that that's somewhere where I have had exposure to it. But in this next chapter of my career, I'm really going to be focusing more on executive coaching and mentoring to help
Nice.
level up our executive team and not just our managerial team.
Okay, so a little bit of OD there. Okay, okay. Shout out
Yeah.
to OD. And so I will just take one question from the chat, and then we'll go through the series of questions we want to ask you. One of the questions in the chat, and I'll answer it myself. You know, as part of being in the HR community. The question is from ABCD. I have a question. Is it essential to learn Excel to step the into HR? I would say depending on what area you get into HR, just Excel in general, it's helpful, particularly when you're dealing with large amount of data. I think about areas of total rewards, compensation, and benefits. Also to talent acquisition, in terms of sorting candidates and data. Any thoughts on that, Katia? Just kind of the importance of Excel.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think it's absolutely necessary in every single function of HR, but I do think having a foundational understanding of Excel is important, similar to what you said in terms of being able to see trends within recruitment, being able to see trends within turnover and attrition. Excel is really helpful for that. You can get a lot of that from your employee, like exit surveys, but a
Yep.
lot of that is more feelings based versus quantitative data, right? That's more tangible and easier to look at. And so I think it's important for that, but it really depends on the type of HR function that you're trying to go into. Not all of them need it.
Okay.
And I would say the other thing is I work really closely with accounting and finance, and so
Ah,
I'm not the best Excel person, and so I do lean on them a lot to help me if I can't figure out a formula or creating pivot tables and things like that.
okay. All right. Well, thank you, Katia, for answering that, and thank you, ABCD, for posing the question. I want to talk a little bit more about the business side. You had referenced that you were a part of a merger and acquisition. Experienced it. We hear a lot in the news and the media about this company being acquired, that company being acquired. For what is HR's role, and from your experience in supporting a merger and acquisition for an organization? What does that look like for our audience?
Yeah, so I would say there's two facets to it. The first is before the acquisition happens, and then the second is afterwards. And the before work is getting all of the documentation that's needed in order for the acquisition to go through. There's a lot of paperwork and a lot of things that need to be double checked by the purchasing company to make sure that the transaction is able to go through. And so
Sure.
HR has a lot of that documentation. And so I would say that that's the biggest thing. And what I would say is that work starts not from the time that the acquisition, you hear about the acquisition, but even before that, right? Like always making sure that your files are organized and easy to find is going to help you once you get there. Um, and then really what I think this is where HR's biggest lift is after the acquisition in terms of, okay, now we have this brand new company. How do we help everyone on board to this new company? Because while one company is joining another one, essentially it's a brand new company for both parties. And so how do we create this smooth transition, right? How do we figure out what our new identity is. That's the biggest, that I would say is the biggest lift for HR.
Absolutely. And you just dovetailed to my next question about employee engagement, right? Because it's also tied, in merger and acquisition. Just want to, before we just jump into employee engagement, any thoughts on mergers, acquisitions? A lot of times there's a need for HR to harmonize policies or total rewards. Um, just any thoughts on that? Have observed that, or kind of in the mergers, acquisitions you've been a part of, it was pretty symmetrical even pre-merger, you would say?
Um, I don't know if I've actually ever found that one company's offerings were symmetrical or equal to the other
Sure.
company's offerings just because of location. I think that different parts of the country like want different things essentially.
Yep.
Um, and so the biggest piece of advice that I would give in that situation is to not try to keep certain things from one company and certain things from another company to try to appease or like
Ah,
have it be like a more friendly transition. Instead, really think through what can the new organization uphold, what are we financially able to do, even if
sure.
it is totally scrapping the benefits plans and starting over. Because what I have found is usually what happens is we try to keep things from one company and we try to do it and then we start doing it and then 6 months down the line we figure out we
Yep.
can't do it
Yep.
and then we have to take that benefit or perk away, and that's worse than if we had just done it at the beginning when there was already all of this change happening. And
From
so
a
just
change
thinking,
management.
yeah, so just thinking through that honestly is probably the biggest thing.
Fair enough. So let's talk a little bit about employee engagement, which also mergers and acquisitions. There's a cause and effect. Just talk a little bit about kind of your perspective on employee engagement and kind of the approaches you have taken towards it based on your experiences.
Yeah, and employee engagement, are you talking about still wanting to retain the employees, or are you talking about in terms of trying to make sure that everyone is as happy as they can be during that so that we continue to retain them?
So I would say both, right? So in terms of employees and them being satisfied at work, and so kind of which kind of dovetails into either company culture or major change. We talked about merging, and acquisitions. Kind of how is that measured? Is that championed through line managers, HR? Just talk a little bit about that and your various experiences in your career.
Yeah. So I would say that the biggest thing would be to make sure two things. One, to make sure that you're always being as transparent as you can be and letting the individuals know that you will have updates on something when, and give them updates when you say that you will. Um,
Sure.
and then the second is to rip off that band aid as hard as you think it's going to be. And so I think sometimes we announce things faster than we should, and then we think that it's going to be better for the employees, but in the long run it's actually not that great for them because then they're anxious about the future, and so that then um, has a negative effect on their morale and their production within the organization. And so I would say um, that would probably be the two biggest piece of advice, or the two biggest piece of advice that I would have is being as transparent as you can, um, and being and just ripping off the band-aid as quickly as
Okay.
you can.
That
Yeah.
that was that was pretty direct, straightforward. So I think there's different approaches, and also depends on the industry, and where whether how big or small it is, and the business climates are definitely very very helpful. Kind of your perspective. Let's talk a little bit about I did get a chance to educate myself in your background. Just talk about DEI in terms of um, initiatives and also thought partners that you may have collaborated in your career, and kind of what would those initiatives like? A lot of times, there's overlap within DEI and HR, and just want to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, at least in my experience, there has been a lot of overlap between DE&I and HR, to be honest with you. I have been a part of smaller organizations though. Again, right? Like my largest organization was about 2000 when I left. So it's not massive like a Google or an Amazon.
Sure.
Um, and so I would say, yes, there is. And I would say that in terms of thought partners or initiatives, it would always be, I would try to make sure that I had champions from different departments and champions that truly were excited about these initiatives and truly wanted to be a part of these initiatives. Because if you don't have that, it's going to be very hard to be able to put forth initiatives within the organization. I would also say just making sure that you have support from the top and having it actually be something that they see is important, maybe even coming from them instead of individual contributors. Because if they see it as important, then they will make it a priority. Um, and it will be helpful as you come up with initiatives and start rolling them out across the org. Um,
Okay.
I, I would say that right now, honestly, um, I have become more a fan of following different people on LinkedIn whose posts or whose ideas align a lot with mine.
Oh,
And
okay.
really, yeah. And so, really looking at what they say and like looking at um, articles that they repost and things like that to
Sure.
learn more about how to not just structure DE&I initiatives, but
Yep.
other
Yep.
initiatives. And so, that was something that I picked up during COVID.
Okay.
Um, I would also say that I do still talk to a lot of people in my network just about things that they wish that they had known or things that they now know,
Yep.
and want to pass on like words of wisdom. Now I do use ChatGPT more often than
Okay.
not, not necessarily to like draft up anything for me, but to help enhance my searches and help make them even better and just give me a different perspective. Um, and then in terms of initiatives, I think that my initiatives have always been focused more around education and increasing curiosity versus
Okay.
um, just stating perspectives, to be quite honest. I feel like we all have different perspectives on all sorts of different things. And so, why
Sure.
not try to spark that curiosity and really spark that conversation amongst the team members to help each other learn more about that subject and also
Yep.
learn more about each other and our perspective. So I think that those are two things that I think about when putting together DE&I initiatives.
I think that's really insightful. It is definitely very visible topic for many communities, and that outside of work, at work, and something that's talked about, LinkedIn and other various platforms, and something that I am in support of. I share multiple identities, in being part of not only HR but as well as ethnically and other sorts. So definitely, when I came across your profile, and you talked about partnering, I think the piece about education and increasing curiosity is important, because you want to create value to your audience as to why they should want to get to know more about this subject, and also perhaps give them a different perspective that they may not have had. And so definitely wanted to get your take about this. Just want to ask you just a couple of questions. Thank you once again, for taking time out of your busy
Of
schedule.
course, yeah.
Want to talk a little bit about you. I chuckled. I said Texas, but it's Tex us. Okay.
Texas,
Um,
yeah.
so, um, talk a little bit about kind of your areas of line of sight as HR director. Is it like recruitment? Is it like a generalist? Like, what's that like?
Yeah, so I'd say that my role has actually really evolved at Texas over the last few years that I've been here. It did start out more in that generalist function, especially the
Sure.
first 6-ish months when I was a solo team member. And so I was really building out the foundation. Then, as my team started to grow, I hired someone that was primarily for recruiting and then an HR coordinator who is a person who follows through with everything. So in terms of like setting up schedule or setting up interviews, helping with execution of events, executing on onboarding, she's the person that handles all of that. Now that I would call it the transactional side of HR is more set in stone, like the
Okay.
benefits, payroll, it's all kind of flowing together. The HR team is actually leveling up. And so recently I promoted my coordinator to an HR generalist. And so
Oh,
she will
okay.
now be handling all of the benefits, the payroll, the leaves, the 401k audits, ACA, all of that sort of things in addition to some of the recruiting and onboarding. And then I'm moving more into a strategic function within HR. And so I'm moving more into the executive coaching piece of HR. And so not just focusing on manager coaching, but really focusing on executive coaching to help level up our entire organization.
I see.
Um, Still working on employee relations, terminations, and then still owning performance reviews as well.
Okay.
But those, and while I still have a hand in recruiting and onboarding, it's more on overseeing how the process works and making sure that the process is in place versus actually doing the recruiting and the onboarding and the offboarding, if that makes sense.
No, definitely makes sense. I mean, definitely you're positioning, you know, and not just to our audience, right? You position yourself as a thought partner and as a value add to the business as you are in a leadership role, yourself. So I think it's definitely helpful, you kind of explain that, that nuance. Rapid fire, is not only just in text us, but just in your career. A proud HR initiative you took a part of and why?
Wow, that's a really good question. And something that I am proud of is our onboarding process that we have established at
Okay.
Texas, actually. And the reason why I'm so proud of it is because it is the most thorough onboarding that I've ever helped create. And I have been able to see how valuable it is to the organization in terms of our team members are able to get up to speed within the first 45 days instead of the first 90 days. So it cut our onboarding time in half. And so we're really able to see if people are a fit a lot sooner than we had been in the past. And so while it does it's not great when we have to let somebody go, we're able to figure that out much faster, making it a better transition for both the company and the employee.
Yeah.
Um, I would also say that it's one of the most organized onboarding processes that I've ever built out. And so I'm really proud of that.
Nice. Okay. Okay. That's certainly felt. That's certainly fair. Talk about essential skills or skills of being an HR professional. What would you say?
I would say that one of the most important ones would just be curiosity, really wanting to understand what the other individual is saying, why they're saying it. At the end of the day, we're all on the same team. I think a lot of times department leaders, HR leaders included, forget that we're all on the same team and that our role here is to help the company succeed, even though how we get there looks different for each department, right? But really trying to understand how can we make things better, how can we help each other see each other's perspectives is
Sure.
key. So I would say just staying curious.
Okay. And then closing thoughts. Where do you see HR going as a business function in the world of business?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, things are so rapidly changing in the world in general, which is what is so exciting. And I think that a lot of people are saying AI is going to take over HR, and that could very well be a possibility. I don't think that that's going to be the case, honestly, but I think that HR is going to continue to be a very strategic and consultative function that is within a business, and it's going to be something that people really look at as a necessity initially versus something that is an afterthought, right? A lot of companies are still hiring HR leaders once they're like 50 or 75, bringing on HR as soon as possible, maybe even in the first like 10 hires, is only going to help a company succeed faster too.
Okay, Katia, thank you so much for meeting with me and spending an afternoon, right? And where you are. And so this will be posted on LinkedIn and YouTube. And so once again, everyone, thank you for being here. And Katia, thank you for sharing your experiences with us. Very interesting, your unique experience, especially working in kind of smaller organizations, kind of gives our community a different perspective, kind of what's a right fit for them. So.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Anthony. It was so great to be here. And don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything else.
All right. Take care,